Hey everybody. So in the Gemara, they'll sometimes use this phrase where they're comparing humans to God, showing the difference between human beings and God. And the expression is, we just had this in Daf Yomi, and it's talking about mezuzah. And it says, Bo ur'e, come and look. Shelo kamidat HaKadosh Baruch Hu, kamidat basar v'dam. The character traits, the attributes, the abilities of God are very, very different than the abilities and attributes of a human being. And it talks regarding the mezuzah. That when it comes to the mezuzah, we put it on our doorpost, and the idea is that it acts as shmirah, it acts as a guard for us. So it says, normally, Melech Yoshev mibifnim, the king sits inside his palace, the Am and the people, they guard him from outside. Not when it comes to Kadosh Baruch Hu, not when it comes to God. Because what does he do? Avadav yoshvim bifnim. His servants, us human beings, we sit inside. V'hu, and he, mishamram b'chutz. He guards us from the outside through the mezuzah. So it's like a flip in a certain sense to show an accident, the difference between, one of the differences, well, there are many, between God and human beings. I had one of these, the difference between God and human being moments this past Monday, where we did a bike ride with my dear friend Michael Chessel, who led us in a bike ride. He is a volunteer park ranger. And we went down to Shark Valley, which is, I'm not sure if it's a national or if it's a state park. And there's a bike ride there that you could take. There's a big loop. It's 15 miles. And you get to be out in the Everglades and see nature, and you pass these alligators that are right there. And so there were 4 of us on this bike ride. Michael, Maish, myself, and a young fellow, Aaron. And so when we finished the bike ride, I looked at my bike app to see how many calories I had burnt from this almost 15-mile bike ride, just short of 15 miles. And mine said 679 calories, burned 679 calories, very nice. And Maish Stamen, he looked at his app, which is completely different, one of his watch things type of thing, and he had 672 calories. And at first I was very, very impressed, like, wow, that's really accurate. Like, both of these apps, which are very different and disparate, they have very, very similar things. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized this isn't impressive at all. As a matter of fact, this is a significant flaw. You see, we all had very different bikes. Michael and Aaron had those really light carbon fiber type bikes. I had like a middle of the road bike, a decent bike, an aluminum bike, which is heavier than those. Maish had the heaviest bike. And he had thick tires. I have thin road tires. The other ones had thin road tires. I kept up with those 2 guys most of the way, but then they sprinted at the end. And then I got in a couple minutes later. And then a good 5 minutes later, huffing and puffing, here comes Maish on his bike. And not because he's in worse shape than any of us, but because his bike is much harder to pedal. It's heavier. It had thicker tires. The thicker the tire, the more friction, the more resistance. It made me think there's no way that we burnt the same amount of calories. He worked much harder than me, and certainly much harder than those other 2 guys. And this shows you the limitations, the difference between God and human. Because human beings, they made those algorithms, they made those apps, they have some sort of computerized thing, and it tells you that based on the distance, this is how many calories you're burning. They do not take into account the fact that you might be riding against the wind, or you might be riding a much more difficult bike to ride in that distance. And that's the difference between God and humans. Because when it comes to doing mitzvot, when it comes to doing the right thing, if it's relatively easy and you have a carbon fiber bike to fulfill that mitzvah, so to speak, you get reward, no question about it. But the Talmud says, Lefum tzara agra, according to the amount of pain and effort, that's the reward. So if you have one of those carbon fiber bikes helping you to do that mitzvah, great, you get reward. If you got a middle-of-the-road Cannondale like I do, which is a little bit heavier, you'll get more reward. And if you're driving something like Maish Stamen is driving, you get a lot of reward because you put in way more effort to do that mitzvah, to cover those 15 miles, whatever the case may be. And so, I'll give you an example. We have a fellow who comes in here almost every day now. He's becoming much more frequent during the week. And he's disabled. He has no use of his left arm. And one of these top Broward County mobile assistance buses that brings him here. And it brings him here, and for him to put on tefillin, he needs assistance. People have to put the tefillin on for him. And that guy comes almost every day. The reward of him putting on tefillin, of course, it's greater than the reward of anyone else in the shul. Why? Because he puts way more effort. It's so much more work for him to put on tefillin than someone like the rest of us who have the use of our hands and our arms and don't need a special bus to bring us to synagogue for disabled people because he's in a wheelchair. And so lafum tzara agra, according to the effort, the pain, the work you put in, God understands and recognizes all the specifics and details that it took for you to do what you accomplished in terms of doing some good in this world. So again, the apps, man doesn't recognize that, but God does recognize that. He recognizes the difference when you got a carbon fiber means of doing a mitzvah, which is still good, don't get me wrong, it's great. But if you're riding something a lot heavier and more difficult to fulfill the mitzvah to get it done, the Almighty recognizes that, and you will and are duly rewarded. Have a good Shabbat.